you are dialing in from. We'd always love to see that. And for those attending this event new, my name is Zhang Mei. I'm the founder of WildChina, and this is our monthly book event, book club event, always a book around China theme. And so if you're new, welcome. Now for this month, as you already know, Carolyn Phillips is our guest of honor, and she wrote this book called The Dim Sum Field Guide, which is also hand illustrated beautifully by Carolyn herself. Hang on, let me see if I, yes, one second. I really enjoy this. And I have to get to Carolyn a little bit later of how she came up with the categorization of the genus and species. But regardless of whether we say that or types, there are many different kinds of dim sums in the book. And it's a very handy tool that you could use if you go to a Chinese restaurant. But be warned, don't make the same mistake that I made. I read the book before cooking dinner. And it just got me really hungry. I started thinking of rushing down to Safeway to get some frozen dim sum. So a bit about Carolyn. Carolyn herself is a very well-known Chinese food writer here in the US, just down the street from me, as you already heard, in the Bay Area. In addition to the Dim Sum Field Guide, she also authored 2 other books, All Under Heaven, recipes from the 35 cuisines of China. If anyone has a question on the number, we can talk about that as well. Normally people hear of 4, but why 35? We can talk about that later. And also another book, At the Chinese Table. This is a memoir of her journey. And she was also the finalist for 2 James Beard Awards and has had her articles and illustrations and recipes featured in several major publications. She also happens, well, we talked about that. And I was very lucky last week. I met Carolyn and her husband, Mr. Huang, for coffee. And it was lovely to find out that her husband is also a writer. And maybe sometime down the road, we'll talk about Lao Tzu and the art of war. That's another story. So Carolyn, welcome. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And
oh, you know what?
Yes.
Let me see if Zoom Connected just finally downloaded. Let me see if I can get this to work. Hold on. So you go ahead and talk, and I'm just going to tap away on my cell phone here to see if I can get things to work. It's just like
okay, no problem. Now let's take a look in our chat box. We have Kathy from Florida and Bruce from LA. Hey, and Kitty from hometown Berkeley, also lived in Alameda, so you know the challenges. And love the field guide idea. And oh, Kitty also read All Under Heaven. Fantastic book. Great.
Thank you.
So, and Glenn, hi, from Scottsdale. So we have our friends joining from various places. And I'll talk just a little bit about today's original plan. And now that we don't have power for Carolyn, we may make some adjustments. Initial thinking was Carolyn was going to do a bit of 10-15 minutes overview of
Hold on a second. I'm going to leave. Sorry, I'm going to leave the conversation and I'm going to see if I can join with Zoom. Okay.
Go ahead. Not a problem. We have Deb from Anchorage, Alaska. Is it still cold up there, or is it getting cold actually? And Michael from Phoenix, lovely. It's just wonderful to see. So originally we were going to have Carolyn talk for about 10 to 15 minutes about the book, and then we switched to Q&As. And I have read the book and with lots of questions, and we have some pre-received questions. And if you have questions, please jump in, right? And we can talk about some of these other books as well. Hey, it's good to see you there. I think it's muted. You are muted, Carolyn. Yep.
Got it?
Now we hear you, but we don't see you anymore.
See if I can get this to work. Holy cow.
Oh, now
okay.
It's working.
There we go.
Fantastic.
Very good. Nice to see you again, literally.
Yes. Well.
Okay.
Are
As
you
the
set
sun
up?
sets here in Alameda, I might go dark and I might get a flashlight and really turn this into a Halloweeny experience. So
I've done it before in total pitch darkness. So I've walked us over through the original plan was to have you talk to us about 10-15 minutes about why the book and show some of your illustrations. Given the circumstances, how do you think? Is that doable?
sure.
Still, yeah.
Well,
Please.
I'll work with you.
Over to you. And whenever you
Okay.
need the PowerPoint or some of the illustrations to be shown, I'm sure Kendra can help us on the WildChina dialing.
Okay.
account.
Sounds good. Actually, the idea for this book came from an article I did for Lucky Peach. I don't know if any of you know that magazine, but it is now defunct, but maybe about 6, 7 years ago, it was like a real big deal. It had Devin Chang and Anthony Bourdain was involved. And anyway, I was talking to one of the editors there, and she said she wanted me to write an article for their Chinatown issue. And we started knocking some ideas around, and we came up with this idea for a dim sum field guide. And we got really silly, and he said, let's write it like it was like a an Audubon book. And so you have like the genus and the nesting patterns in the book, and it's very silly, but it's fun. It was really it was well received by Lucky Peach. And when they went to the MAD conference in Copenhagen that year, I think it was 2016 or so, or no, probably 2015. They made the article I wrote into a handout for the folks at the conference. And so that just gave me a whole kind of encouragement. And my book was taking forever to come out, The All Under Heaven. So I wrote to Aaron Werner over at 10 Speed. And I said, I have a great idea for a book. Why don't we do the dim sum field guide? And he said, sounds cool. And so we were off and running. And so while I was waiting for All Under Heaven to finally get published, I wrote the dim sum field guide, and they both came out on the same day, which I've never heard anybody else doing. I think Prince dropped 2 albums on one day, but I'm up there with the purple one. So
That's great.
yeah, I was lucky.
So
it was a fun thing to write because I do love dim sum.
Yeah. So how many, as I was reading, because I had it on Kindle, so I couldn't quite count how many genuses, is that the right plural word? And species do you have?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think I might have counted them at one time, but I don't remember. I would say there's probably 50 or 60 at least in here.
Huh. But how did you group, like which fall under the genus and which fall under the species?
Oh, okay. What I did was I divided them first by savor and sweet, the 2 main categories. And then I went from there to like steamed wrappers, unwrapped proteins, for example, like roast suckling pig or, black bean spare ribs, baked dim sum, which we all know about, pan and the deep fried dim sum, and then extras, things like congee or rice noodles or chow mein, things like that. And then for the sweet dim sum, it was similar. It was like the hot and warm sweets, then the sweet buns, chilled sweets, and then cakes and tarts. So it was just, those were the basic subgroupings for them.
Okay, we'll come back to this. But as I was preparing my questions, I started thinking, I said, from which dish do I want to start in asking you? And of course, my favorite would be the chicken feet, which I know it runs the danger of being very cliche. So instead, I think I'm going to start with duck chins. And this, here I'm going to quote from your book. This is absolute head to toe dining at its most creative and delicious. China is truly the home to the whole hog or in this case, whole bird school of culinary philosophy. Now, the reason I wanted to start with this is I love the way you write about these sort of lesser known items, which you made them not overly exotic. You just treated them, this is something we eat. And instead you brought out something that was blatantly there, but no one really discussed, is the whole hog philosophy, or this whole sort of head to toe eating philosophy in dim sum or in Chinese food in general. Maybe you can take this subject and expand on that a little bit for us, your take on this.
Sure. Duck chins, actually, it's something that I've never really encountered except in a dim sum restaurant. And it's just, it is actually the bottom beak. There's this morsel of meat down here, and it holds the tongue. And so you have these thin like bones on both sides of the tongue. And the other place we encountered them actually was in Taipei. That's where I ate them first. My then boyfriend, now husband, and I used to go to watch Kung Fu movies all the time. We were both Kung Fu movie fanatics. And we would buy a bag of braised duck tongues, and they would come with the bottom beak, and they're wonderful, meaty little morsels. And why they're good is because of the texture. They're ducks quack a lot, and so they use them a lot. And I imagine my tongue probably has a very similar texture because I talk a lot. But they are used, and they're braised and soak in the sauces, whatever they're cooked in. And so they're lovely to munch on, but they're also something that you can't just like stuff in your mouth like popcorn. You've got to slowly work it around and enjoy, and sort of I guess really kind of appreciate it, and the little things in your mouth, like the bones and the tendons and stuff like that. And it's something that I've noticed that Chinese do admirably with all the different parts of the animal. That when I remember my first meal with my Chinese family, the host family, my first week in Taiwan, the mother was sucking on the brains and the eyeballs of a fried pomfret. And of course, my mouth was kind of like, but she was smiling happily, and she was wonderful. She knew that I was kind of like freaked out, this girl from California. And she started working on teaching me how to enjoy the different parts of the animal, like a pomfret. She started on the cheeks, which are a great way to get introduced to the head of a fish, because the cheeks have a somewhat similar texture to a duck chin, in that they're chewy and they're often used by the animal. And so then we worked our ways up to the eyeballs and the head. And what it taught me was that there is so much of an animal that we waste in the United States. It all ends up in dog food or somewhere. I don't know where we put all the parts of the animal that is not served in a restaurant. And it's dismaying to me, because things like tripe, pork tripe, or lamb tripe, or pig tripe, they are delicious if they're cooked well. Goose intestines, which you can also get inside of dim sum restaurants, some of them, sound horrible. They sound like they would be rubber bands. But when they're cooked correctly, they're sliced open and they become like these wisps of silk, and they're braised. And so they are cooked until tender, and usually tossed with like Chinese celery or something like that. So you have this herbal note that's crunchy against these silky wisps that then, I'm beginning to drool, that have soaked up all the savory sauces. And it's just like, it's heaven. And pig's feet and tails, and I mean, every part of the animal is just treated with such loving attention, and by a good Chinese chef, that it's something that we in the West really need to learn, because there's so much to enjoy in every part of the animal. And it's also giving the animal, I think, more of its due. We're not just taking the steaks off the cow and throwing the rest of the animal away. We're treating it with reverence. If it's fed well, if it's raised well, if it's even slaughtered well, with as much kindness as we possibly can muster, and then cooked with regard and respect, To me, that is giving the animal more of its due, and there's much less waste involved.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think most people don't well, even though I don't eat tripe, but most people don't know.
I'm going to teach you.
Maybe I'll try the goose stomach. But many of our friends would, when they go on train rides or, play mahjong or whatever, they would have bags of these, like you watching a movie on Netflix time. They should have a Netflix brand of duck tongues and chicken feet or goose wings or whatever packaged as those are just snacks. That's part of, Chinese prefer these savory snacks more so than, say, cookies or candy, right? And I quite like that. I think it's healthier. And I really totally appreciate the philosophy that you just shared.
Thank you.
My mouth is watering. Okay, the next dish I wanted to have, because I find the writing like really talks to me. So I'm going to quote this bit. So, marinated ribs are coated in an egg batter, fried until very crispy, and then quickly chucked into a syrup mixture of strong coffee, sugar, and soy sauce. They encourage extended nibbling in order to gnaw out every last morsel of flavorful meat, chewy tendon, and glassy crust. This is the dish I want most from this description. But the thing is, though, having had some dim sum, I've never had this dish. This is the
coffee ribs. Oh, yeah, that's it. It's more of a modern Hong Kong invention. Yeah.
Right, and you included a few other dishes like the buttered napa cabbage, 奶油焗白菜, curry chicken, 咖喱鸡, and there was, through your book, it shows like there's so much sort of international influence, but yes, there's also this, maybe some of the influence comes from the West to Hong Kong, Guangzhou area, then goes out from the region back to Southeast Asia, to Thailand, to like Singapore. So there's this constant flow of these dietary habits, right? Can you talk a little bit about that sort of, regional, where is dim sum from and how is it influenced by various cultures? And how is
it really goes way back. It really can't be considered Han Chinese at its very basic. Probably a lot of it came from the Hui Muslims, because they brought so much of the noodles and the pasta dishes into China from Central Asia, from the Silk Roads. And so things even like jiaozi, the dumplings or the steamed dumplings, the baozi, the steamed breads, the steamed peel breads, all of those things were probably a gift from the Hui Muslim people. And so we have them probably forming like the foundation for the whole dim sum, building that we have here. And then you have other influences, for example, from the imperial palaces, the Qing palaces, you have the jellies that they had, a very, very light kind of chewy dishes that are not very sweet, but they might be made out of, say, yellow peas, dried yellow peas, or for example, like an agar with wolfberries like goji berries and Chinese dates, things like that. And then you go further. Oh, we've got electricity back on. Yay. And then we go into other areas like you mentioned, Hong Kong and Guangzhou. Guangzhou was a concession. One of the I don't know if people understand the concessions were after the Opium Wars, that many of China's ports, I think it was like 80 actually cities, were given willy-nilly to foreign countries. And so, I mean, we can get into the politics here, but I'm going to talk about food. In Guangzhou, you had a very large English presence there. And while in many ways it was horrible, they did bring in these foreign influences that have remained to this day. The idea of cakes, we have things like Malay cakes, the custard tarts that are there. And all of these were brought by probably either Chinese, British colonists, or the cooks that probably cooked for them, and they learned, to cook for the people that they were working for, and then probably thought, oh, this sounds pretty good, and they brought it outside, and people learned from those. So things like ketchup too was also came from like Americans, or probably. And hot dogs, you'll find hot dogs wrapped inside of like a biscuit dough and baked, and that's very American. It's like pigs in a blanket, and you find this like all over. And then other pastries came, like the concha, the Mexican concha buns, which have like a sugar, like a what do you call it, a cookie crust on top. Those probably went over from Mexico to Japan, where they're called melon buns, I think. And then those went down to Hong Kong and became the things like the bola mianbao. They were where they have like a pineapple kind of design on them, like a crosshatch on them, but it's like a cookie dough on top of a bread dough. And so you have all these influences. Food tells you so much about history and how much the world is really united. We tend to think of it as divided, that everything like grows up by its own, and we have singular cultures, but actually we're all so interrelated. It's fabulous. The lessons that food have to tell us.
Yeah, as you started talking about the dim sum, you mentioned the Hui influence, and one of our guests pre-submitted a question from Anthony Fragola. He asked, what aspects of dim sum were influenced by the Silk Road trade? Was that an important factor?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good question. And the Silk Road actually was where the Hui Muslims came from. They probably originated in Persia. And so they brought so many of the foods that we can kind of like trace all the way back to Central Asia, to Persia, things like xiaolongbao, the toasted puff breads from northern China that we think are just so almost define northern Chinese cooking and breakfast, probably came from Central Asia, because they're cooked in tandoor ovens. And where else do you get tandoor? I mean, and then tandoor ovens were eventually used to roast things like duck, down in Guangzhou, where you have the Cantonese roast ducks. Those are roasted in tandoor ovens, which it just cracks me up. And it's just like, you can just see this, like they came all the way from Central Asia and then all the way down the coast. I mean, nobody took the short route. It's just like all the way around China, and brought all these great ideas in. And then of course the Chinese were taking their ideas and sending them out into the world as well. But as far as the Silk Roads go, things like spices came into China, like cinnamon, like star anise, cardamom, and also cumin too, which is very much, when I was in Taiwan, I didn't even know the word for cumin. It wasn't even in the dictionary. It wasn't until I started to get into more of the Western Chinese cooking that I realized it was called ziran, and there was actually a term for it. But before that, I had never heard of it. But again, it's all connected.
Yeah, and so for me from Yunnan, ziran was also a later introduction into my culture as well, because I associate that with lamb, with Mongolian northern cooking. And so on this subject, I want to share, I traveled with Anissa Halou, whom I'm sure you know. She's also a fabulous cookbook writer. We traveled from Kashgar all the way out to Uzbekistan. And baozi, the steamed buns, change over land, over the geography, right? In Guangdong area, these steamed buns are all steamed. And then when you are in Kashgar, they're already starting to get baked. And outside of the border in Kyrgyzstan, they start to be referred to as manti. The locals would tell me manti. And Anissa had a different name for them from Arabic language. And eventually we found out manti was referring to mantou, which is also a steamed bun in Chinese. And yet she had a different Arabic name. And the ones in the middle, Anissa's from Lebanon. And so everyone in the middle could understand both languages. And it was just magical to see how the culinary culture sort of migrated along the Silk Road. And I have no idea whether it came from west to east or east to west.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, probably the breads and the pastas came from Central Asia. I would say probably from up near Uzbekistan area. There's the a valley there where the great horses, the Arabic horses that were later introduced into China, the Tianma of the Tang Dynasty. Before that, they were like these little stocky Mongolian horses that were just so wonderful, you know, as far as being hardy and able to, you know, take part in conquering all of Eurasia. But then the beautiful Arabic horses that we have later on came in probably around the Tang Dynasty from Central Asia. So we had this infusion of culture from Central Asia along the Silk Roads. And I mean, all roads led to Xi'an and to Beijing. If you look at the Silk Roads, and they were the superhighways of their time. They were transmitting ideas and religions and silks and spices and foods and ideas. And it's just amazing. I don't think we really understood how great the contributions of the Silk Roads are. But that's like a whole nother subject. I could talk about that for hours. I love that subject.
We can talk about that. Right. Back to dim sum. I actually had this exchange prior to the session. How do we define dim sum? Are we defining dim sum by the way the dishes are prepared? Or are we defining it by the way the dishes are served? I say that because sometimes when we think of, particularly Kendra and I had this conversation about, say, 鼎泰丰. I think many of our participants would know 鼎泰丰. 鼎泰丰's food items, I think I can find that most of them in your book, except some of the soups. But 鼎泰丰's way of service, isn't this cart strolling around and you can pick off from the little carts. So are we defining dim sum by food, or the way they're cooked, or by the way they are served?
Traditionally, a dim sum should be served in a Cantonese style tea house. There are different kinds of dim sum. There's northern dim sum. What's served in Din Tai Fung is actually it's a Japanese version of Shanghainese food. That the xiaolongbao is, of course, their most famous. And then they have fried rice and stuff like that. But it's not really like a standard dim sum restaurant. You're not going to go in there and order a pot of tea and linger over baskets of food and small plates as much as you would inside of a Cantonese style tea house. Dim sum originally meant, I mean, a lot of people think of it as like touching the heart or a little bit of heart, and that's the literal translation. But it's like saying cocktails meant chicken feathers, right? A cocktail, we know, is a drink, right? It's an alcoholic beverage. Dim sum actually comes from the Tang Dynasty, and it means a snack. I think the earliest instance that I've ever seen was a couple was going out that evening, and the wife was getting ready, and her husband said, honey, are you hungry? And she said, yeah, I could have a little snack. And she used the word dim sum. And so dianxin. And so that was just like a little something to fill up the tummy before we head out onto the town. And which, again, it's like these charming looks into how people lived, 1,000 years ago or 1,300 years ago. And so to me, of course, there might be people who have different definitions for this, but as far as I'm concerned, dim sum really refers to Cantonese style tea houses the foods that are served there for breakfast, lunch, brunch, of course, and maybe late night snacks, but they're not formal dinners. There are things that you would order tea for, and that's a big part of a dim sum meal is the tea, because they were meant originally to celebrate the tea. And so when people order like glasses of wine or beer, they're kind of missing the point of a dim sum meal, which is to actually have the tea, which has the tannins in it, just like a good wine. So the palate is cleared, but to savor good tea. It shouldn't be crummy tea. It should be a good quality tea that then complements your food. We have some wonderful dim sum restaurants here in the Bay Area. I think we're one of the luckiest places in America as far as it comes to dim sum. And the ones that do it right will have good tea on hand. And so you sit down, you order your tea, and I have a section in the book at the beginning is about basic dining rules, how you start your meal. You shouldn't just sit down and just start ordering off the cart or just grabbing stuff. You should sit down, relax, get yourself a nice pot of good tea, let it steep, and then start ordering like steamed items, which are light. So you want to sort of like ramp up your meal where you're starting with something light and fresh, and then slowly get into the heavy things. So that way you're not filling up quickly. What I like to do when I go out for dim sum is to have like a bunch of my pals sitting around the table, 8 or 10 people, and we're spending like 3 or 4 hours. But if you're cramming the food in too quickly, you're going to be full and you're not going to be able to enjoy yourself. But if you have a lot of people, you can order a lot of food and take little tiny bits of this and that, and just while away a day. I mean, it's like the best brunch ever.
Okay, anyone's willing to sign up for this whiling away brunch with Caroline? One in the
I'm a
chat.
fanatic.
We will make it happen in the Bay Area. I think I would love that. Okay, I am going to get to the list of restaurants that you recommend, but I'm going to save that for a little bit later because we will get there. And what you were talking, yes, okay.
Okay,
all right.
Shelley.
1 second. Okay, so there is a point that you are making is not only is the style of how the food is served, there is also the time of the day it's eaten, right? It's
right.
never after 7 p.m.
No, I don't think you would really have dim sum after 3, really. Most restaurants tend to, take a break between 3 and 4 anyway. But yeah, I would say late morning is a good time to start. Some of them will start around 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. They'll start doing the dim sum services and then kind of wind down around 2 or 3. But no, you wouldn't go there for dinner.
Right. Okay. And also, does Din Tai Fung, do you count Din Tai Fung as a dim sum place or no?
No.
But based on what you were saying is no. Okay.
No.
All right. Kendra, I
It's
have
good, but it's not dim sum.
It's not dim sum. Okay. All right. So let me get to one of these Kitty's comments. I read every word of your book, referring such an education and so much pleasure. Loved also that you put the Mandarin and Cantonese names there, and the way you organize the information is brilliant. I am a field guide user, and so this was right up my alley, and I love the backstory on the foods, like following cultural diffusion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Completely agree. Okay, Shelley, we will come to the brunch restaurant recommendations in a little bit, but I want to follow up on this. The selection, the way you wrote the book, you selected different items, and there's the Mandarin and Cantonese. I started wondering as I was progressing along the book. It started with things that I generally, or most people probably associate with dim sum, like the hagao, the xiaolongbao, and things like that. And as it progresses, we got to different dishes of different sizes. For example, a whole roasted chicken. Most people probably don't associate that with the little dainty little dishes. And so, as we mentioned earlier, also like the coffee ribs and these other dishes by style, how did you go about your dish selection? Was it based on, was there a guide in China, or this was based on your experience in various Chinese or Cantonese dim sum houses?
Both. I went around to a lot of dim sum restaurants and stole their menus as much as possible, and tried to figure out what was sort of the main offerings for dim sum places. I also consulted a lot of books that I've collected out of Hong Kong that talk about dim sum, how to make them and so forth. And it seemed to me that there were these basic groups that kind of like fold into these categories. For example, the baozi or the xiaolongbao and stuff like that. So what I then tried to do was to try to figure out which are the ones that most people would run into, particularly here in the United States and Canada, as far as offerings, as well as a couple of the few odder ones that I would encourage them to try, again, like the duck chins and the goose intestines and stuff like that. The other thing you mentioned was the chicken, like or roast suckling pork.
Yes.
You were going to get those in good dim sum restaurants. For example, Peony Seafood in Oakland has a roasting master in the back, and I've gone to watch him, and he just does nothing but roast whole suckling pigs, and he puts them on a fork. He's marinated them and then roasts them. They're butterflied open on a fork and roasted over an open flame so that the skin then crackles and bubbles.
Oh.
And it's sort of like, if it's a big enough restaurant like Peony and a couple other places, they will offer these really good meats as well. And you probably won't be getting an entire duck. You'll probably be getting like a quarter of a duck or so forth, unless you want more. But it also, again, depends upon your table. If you have people that, are longing for something like that, then you might have like a whole duck, but that's rather unusual. What they might have is more like the pin pan, a selection of things like a little bit of duck, a little bit of the char pork, maybe some roast suckling pork, things like that. When we did a program, who was it? We did a TV program, for the Travel Channel. And they came out with an entire roast suckling pork over at Peony for them, and it had the little lights in its eyes and everything like that, and little fireworks going off, and it was hysterical. But it was like a very dramatic thing for a fancy banquet, but it's not something that you probably go down there with your girlfriends, have like a whole roast suckling pork.
It's always, going to these Chinese restaurants are always fun, right? Kendra has a question that very much ties into what you were talking about. So some of these dishes are these huge thing that takes a long time to prepare, and yet some of it is very fresh and very timely. And the whole serving process of you check a box on the sheet or they stamp it and gives you the dish. It's extremely efficient. I've seen a restaurant up in, I believe somewhere in Napa, who tried to replicate this model of service with Western food. It didn't work so well. How does it work in the Cantonese dim sum kitchen? How does it work behind the scene? This was Kendra's question. Are there just a ton of chefs cooking at once, or is it more like a bakery that they get up really early in the morning, have everything done? And
if it's a really good place, they will do everything by hand, and a lot of it will be to order. The ones that I have seen that I like the most will have masters working continually from like about an hour before service starts, and will be pounding out, just like plate after plate of whatever it is that their specialty is. And usually these people are specialists in one kind of things, like the changfen, which is like the rice, the fresh rice roll, where you can go back there if you're able to go back in the kitchen, you'll see them pour out the rice batter, the fresh rice batter, onto this very thin steaming plate that is lined with cotton, stick it in the steamer for a couple seconds, and then bring it out, and then fill it with things, roll it up, and serve it. And it's like continual, one after the other. They'll make enough for the carts that go out around the room, but they will also make it to order as well. And so if the place is really banging, if it's a really popular place, these people will be just working like in a frenzy for like 4 or 5 hours, just continually just banging out the food one by the other. What you want is a place like that for a sublime dim sum meal. Some places will, unfortunately, have frozen foods that they will be steaming or frying. And you can taste those. They won't have the freshness, this melt in the mouth kind of texture. And it's unfortunate, but I mean, they've got to survive. But you know, it's not what you really want to have is a sublime experience. The ones that are the best really will be making things, I mean, like I just said, just continually, and they'll do like variations on a theme. If you have something that you want as special, then you can put in a special order for something. But usually it's just stuff that is just done. I mean, I like when I went to this one big kitchen, I was just watching them just churn out stuff continually. Like, for example, hargao, which are the fresh shrimp steamed dumplings. They don't roll them out. They take a piece of the rice dough that is it's almost like Play-Doh in texture, and they slap it with a wide Chinese knife. And so it has this wonderful tensile texture. They slap it down on the work surface, scrape it up, and then wrap it with fresh wild caught shrimp, and then steam it until it is just barely done. And you put it in your mouth, the shrimp just explode in your mouth. They're crunchy. There's very little other seasoning in there other than maybe a little salt, a little bit of rice wine, maybe a touch of ginger, some bamboo shoots, but that's it. It's all about the shrimp. It's all about the wrapper. A secondary place that does hargao, you lift them off of the basket, and the bottoms will drop out because they've been steamed too long. So it's like, you get to be, I mean, like me, I'm a cranky diner. So, you know, you just like, you go in there, you get used to, I want the best, you know, because if I go out to dim sum, I only want to eat it where it's really, really, really good. It's like going out for a hamburger. I'm not going to go to, you know, a crummy little dive. I'm going to go to a place that has a really, really good hamburger because I'm only going to eat it like, you know, once or twice a year, right? Really good dim sum, maybe for me, it's like once or twice a week, but it's still going to be good, right? So that's the kind of places you want to look for, where there's just stellar quality. And those are the places you want to help to survive too, especially in this kind of economic climate. You want to find your dim sum places and just give them all kinds of love, because they are just struggling nowadays. They really are.
Yeah. So listening to you talk, I'm glad you are a picky eater. That's what we want. We all want to join your table, Shelley and me. But as you were describing the back kitchen, a conversation came to my mind. I was once in this Chinese restaurant in Sausalito called Great China, not associated with the one in Berkeley. And I was talking to the owner, and he said, Chinese restaurants like theirs are on the last breath because they can't find the kind of skilled chefs anymore. In the past, this was sort of like a job that everyone aspired to do, and you find all of them coming from Guangdong. And now it is, you know, China is pretty prosperous. The skilled chefs are not here. And are you worried about this? Is this happening to the good dim sum places as well?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And it's something that has really concerned me very much. And I've talked to a couple of dim sum owners, restaurant owners about this. The really good places go back to places I'm sorry, I can't speak anymore. Go back to Guangzhou and find masters and hire them to the United States to create what are really masterpieces. They're sort of like really good patisserie chefs from Paris that specialize in something special like croissants or whatever. And I've talked to them about the real need for them to then teach the next generation of dim sum chefs. And what I would really like to see is the interest in American chefs, especially young people, that's on the same level that they show for, say, Japanese cooking, where they, like David Chang, went to Japan and learned how to do all these noodle dishes. I would like to see Americans do the same thing. Were they going to China or to Hong Kong or somewhere, or even to Oakland and San Francisco, and asking the owners there, can I do a stage? Can I work here? Can I intern here and learn how to do what you're doing? Because these are arts that are going to disappear if we don't preserve them. And the problem is too that we have idolized the chef world to a certain extent. But it's a tough job, and we have to then also have to pay people a living wage. So it's a lot of things that we've talked about with. I've talked with chefs, with different associations about how to encourage people to go into this field and really learn a skill that will preserve a culture and preserve knowledge. And it's something that's not only confined to dim sum, but the great cuisines of China, all of them. We've lost so many of the great chefs, so many of the great foods that we used to eat in Taiwan back in the 70s and 80s. We went back to Taiwan a couple years ago and the restaurants were gone. The chefs had died or retired. And the young ones that came up were putting caviar on stuff, and foie gras, and thinking that this was really, this was high class, highfalutin type food. But it made me want to cry because it was like, you're just, it's like you've lost, which is this magic, which is traditional Chinese cuisine. And it's okay to develop on that, to build new cuisines out of it. But it's like learning to paint. If you want to paint like Jackson Pollock, you've first got to learn how to sketch, and you first how to draw and to use oil paints. You just don't go on there and start splattering paint on the wall and say, well, I'm Jackson Pollock. You have to have this cultural grounding. You have to know what you're doing. You have to understand this whole language that is the basis for Chinese cuisine.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was imagining these masters. I mean, they spend their lifetime perfecting the exact pinch of the dough to make that hagao and all that. But nowadays, their children, have gone to Silicon Valley, have gone on to Silicon Valley and make more money. And there is constantly this tug and pull, right? Because the reason they're so good is because they repeat at this repetitive activity, which is labor intensive and not so highly paid. So their children obviously will look for ways to connect maybe some portion of their skills to Uber Eats or some sort of internet related concept, right? Where do you see the future of dim sum eating? Will it be delivered to people's houses, or is that something you would like to see, or is there a future different
I
from?
think delivering it to houses is, I guess I have this real kind of fear that people tend to relegate Chinese cuisines to fast food, to cheap food, where you need to be able to get in and out of a restaurant for $10 a pop. when it's sad because it's not giving them these chefs and these people the incentive to create great food. Why can't China's foods receive the same sort of acclaim that Japan's food does, that France's or Italy's foods? It's okay to have a Panda Express, and I'm sure there's, if you like that, that's fine. But you should also be able to go to a great Jiangsu style restaurant where it's going to cost you $150 a person, but it's going to be worth it. You go to French Laundry, it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars per person plus wine, and you accept that because it's French Laundry. But why can't we have a great Chinese restaurant or 5 here in the Bay Area where you're going to receive like absolutely fabulous food, the kind of stuff that you're going to dream about for the rest of your life? And I write about that in my memoir, At the Chinese Table. Some of the meals that were like so stellar that I will never be able to forget them. They're the kind of foods that I always have longed for. And they're the reason why I wrote All Under Heaven, because I didn't want that food memory to evaporate. And so what I would like to see Westerners do is to learn more about China's foods so that they can then talk to restaurant owners and say, what I would like to have is a great, for example, a treasure duck. What would it cost? I'm going to bring in 5 or 10 of my friends. We're going to have this meal. Let's structure a menu, and you get me the best quality. I want you to get Muscovy duck. I want you to get some Neiman Ranch pork or something that's really outstanding. I want you, not the crummy stuff from the supermarket, but the really, really, really good stuff. And I want you to put your heart and soul into it. And I have talked to chefs about this, and they practically cry if somebody is in love with their food and knows what they're doing. Nurture relationships with your chefs. Treat them as humans and get to know them, and welcome their knowledge into your life, because all it does is expand your world. And all it does is make our foods a better place. We are trying to, I think, I elevate the foods of Japan, when to me the foods of China are so much broader and so much deeper, that it's not to say that Japan's foods are not worthy of our esteem. They certainly are. But China's foods are equally, if not even more, worthy of this admiration and this love. And so we have to learn about them. We have to know what we're eating, and so that we can demand the best from chefs, and we also pay them accordingly. So it's a give and take. Americans have to learn to not only speak Chinese, but to eat Chinese, which is really a glorious thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with eating Chinese. I do it every day, and I'm a happy camper.
I know your husband's a happy camper too. And here's a comment from Shelley. And by the way, I completely agree with Barbara's sentiment. Agree 150%.
Thank you.
Well said. And Shelley said she's been 45 years in food business. There's a huge push among restaurant workers to be better paid and have more humane hours, and the entire restaurant business model will need to adapt, and as will the dining public. Fast and cheap will not be the go-to model. It would be great to have this as part of the Asian restaurant model as well. Absolutely. Chinese cuisine, Kitty said Chinese cuisines are incredibly diverse. Totally. Now, time just flies by. I just looked at the clock, and I have to get to your list now, Carolyn. Your list. This is Bruce Austin's question. Where is the best dim sum place in LA and San Francisco? And possibly, if you want to name a few other places, like Beijing or Shanghai. We'd love to have those as well. Let's start with LA and San Francisco.
LA, I haven't been down to LA for a while, but I would definitely go to San Gabriel Valley. Last time I spoke with Jonathan Gold before he died, he loved the Empress restaurant in Old Chinatown. They had been revamped, so I don't know if it's still the same, but I would give it a try. If Jonathan Gold felt it was good, I'd say that's pretty
Which one is, what is
good
it called?
recommendation. Empress, I think it was called Empress.
Empress.
It was, I think on High Street, if I remember. But I would also check out like either LA or some of these other guides to find out what dim sum places are open. I mean, what was COVID going on and everything, everything is just so different, you know, and even here in the Bay Area, so many places are just clinging on by their teeth that I hesitate to recommend because I don't know what is out there anymore.
Yeah.
Here in the Bay Area, Peony Seafood is still fabulous. It's in downtown Oakland in the Renaissance Plaza between 7th and Webster and Franklin. The owner there, Mr. Ju, is fabulous. He has chefs there that he's hired from mainland China that are masters, and he's managed to keep them on goodness knows how throughout this entire pandemic, and my hat's off to him. I loved Hong Kong Lounge too, but it burned down about 2 years ago. That's in San Francisco. Dragon Bow was very good the last time I had there. Dragon is Dragon and then Beaux, I think.
Dragon, but where's
That was
that?
very good. That was out in the Richmond
Is that
district.
near Ranch 99? Richmond. Okay. Never
In the
mind.
Richmond district, I think it was out in Geary, I forget. It was out in the avenues there. There was another place on Pacific, New Asia, but that's like a real old mom and pop place. It looks like a basketball court in there. It's like just ginormous, and it's filled with a bunch of old Cantonese people. So you know it's going to be cheap. You know it's going to be good. They have some of the best roast pork.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And
Someone wants. Yeah, Emery just typed to these. Oh, the Empress Pavilion in LA is permanently closed. They go to Golden Dragon, also in Chinatown.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. And Paula wants to know anything you recommend in New York or Boston?
New York, I haven't had good dim sum in New York. I hate to drop names, but I met with Ruth Reichel there, and we wanted to go out for dim sum together. And we went to this place on Mott Street, and it was just horrible. I was like, the girls just kind of like stood on the side and ignored us. And I kept on saying, this is Ruth Reichel here, you know, just pay attention to her, you know, she's like famous. But yeah, it was awful. So if anybody knows better than me, please let me know, because I would, next time we go out there, I'd love to try it. I'm guessing that good places can be found in Flushing, because we have had some incredible meals out there that were just wonderful. I did this like a shoot with Vice magazine, and they wanted to do a tour of Flushing Chinatown. And I didn't know where to go, and my guy didn't know where to go either. And so we just hopped inside of an Uber, went out there and stopped the car. And we fell like in front of this Fujian style fishbowl restaurant. And it was like these clouds that were just made out of fish. It was just, I mean, I was just ecstatic. We just wandered up and down the area, and it was just food everywhere. So I'm sure we can find it.
Sounds great. I'm sorry. I think we're out of time. And thank you, Barbara, for checking out the address for Dragon Bowl, 5700 Geary in San Francisco. And Tony, thank you. Hi. Yank Sing is one of our favorites in San Francisco on the pricier side. Can Carolyn please come back and tell us more about the Silk Road? Yes. And
Of course.
please come back to and tell us about your art. I have a whole section of questions about your illustrations and your art and your career choices. I think we'd have to read your other book, the memoir. So
Thank you. I'd love to
anyway,
come back. You're a wonderful interviewer.
thank you so much. This is so fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, and everyone, thanks for joining. But as parting word, any parting wisdom you want to share with us, Carolyn?
I would just say, go out and treat your local Chinese restaurants with love. They just really need your love nowadays, especially with COVID and all the horrible things that have gone on. They need to know that you're out there supporting them, and it'll really mean a lot to them. And tip generously.
Yes.
I always do. Tip generously.
Yes. Thank you. That cannot agree with you more. Okay, so for all of us who want to stay in touch, please follow Carolyn on Instagram. It's The Real Madam Huang. It's Madam with an E. The Real Madam Huang on Instagram, or her website is madamhuang.com, and both with E at the end. And you can purchase a copy of Carolyn's books and also her husband's book on the Art of War and the upcoming Lao Tzu, Dao De Jing. So it's delightful to spend time with you all, and come back and join us. And if you want a seat on the table, sign up for the WildChina newsletter. And we will pursue all these talks and eating opportunities with gusto. And for next month, we'll continue the theme on food. So we'll reverse the table a little bit, and Kendra and I will interview me about my book on travel through Dali. I'm looking for a copy. I don't have it here. With a leg of ham. So this is going all the way to China. And so we'll trade books, Carolyn. That would be
Yes.
okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy your evening. And we'll hope to see you at the next WildChina event. Thank you, Carolyn.
Can't wait. My pleasure. Love to see you all.
With you. This sounds amazing.
Let's do it. Let's do it soon.
Okay.
Take care. Bye,
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. Yes.
Bye-bye.